I still remember the first time I entered the Hall of Elders in the Chozo ruins during my initial playthrough of Metroid Prime. The iconic, nostalgic choirs faded in at the sight of a large Chozo statue resting in beams of light just before the haunting Chozo ghosts arrived to ruin the scene. Several different moments throughout Metroid Prime capture the wonder and awe of the Chozo species, a mysterious and powerful alien civilization. The original trilogy is full of these world-building moments for different civilizations, whether it's meeting U-Mos in the Great Temple of the Luminoth or first witnessing the floating chambers of Skytown. Each game offers pieces of lore that reveal fascinating galactic civilizations using some of Nintendo's most understated storytelling. Players form a subtle attachment to these civilizations as they immerse themselves in the richly detailed worlds. So with Metroid Prime 4 drawing ever closer, we need to discuss the likelihood of any of these civilizations returning 2 decades later, and whether that's even possible given where the original games left off. Please consider subscribing to the channel for more Metroid and other gaming analysis content. I'm really trying to hit the 1,000 subscriber mark to build the ultimate Metroid channel here, and I could use your help. So the Metroid Prime trilogy features, or at least mentions, 5 notable advanced civilizations, which are the Chozo, the Luminoth, the Reptilicus tribes, the Ela, and the Necren. The Ela and the Necren have never directly appeared in the franchise and are not as well known, so I discuss whether or not they might appear in Prime 4 in another video on my channel linked below in the description. For now, let's focus on the first 3 to investigate whether we might see them again and what the current state of those civilizations are in the assumed timeline of Prime 4. Now for context, this image shown here is generally considered the accepted Metroid timeline. The Metroid Prime trilogy, as well as spin-offs like Metroid Prime Hunters, take place between the original Metroid 1 and 2 as sort of a separate thread or extended side mission for Samus. This timeline is important for our later discussions. The original Metroid Prime understandably focuses on the Chozo and their home on the planet Talon 4. The Chozo hold great significance in the Metroid universe. They raised Samus as a child, originally created the Metroid species, and influenced wider events in the galaxy and Metroid timeline. By unearthing the Chozo lore scattered around Talon 4, you learn of their demise due to the cancerous meteor that crashed on their homeworld. The Chozo did what they could to contain the evil that grew from this crater, locking away the Metroid Prime with the power of 12 artifacts and the cipher. Interestingly, a living Chozo never actually appears in the flesh in Metroid Prime. The closest we see are the Chozo ghosts, who are distorted, corrupted versions of the species. However, the specific end state of the Chozo people is never fully revealed in the original Metroid Prime. Most of them perished in their battle against the corruption spreading across the planet, but the original game never says whether any of them survived or escaped the planet. That is, until you play Metroid Prime 3. Prime 3 is actually a treasure trove of Chozo lore due to the presence of Skytown, which the Chozo built as a research station to survey the galaxy, among other purposes. Here they also created the Elysians, AI robots gifted with self-awareness who ran the operations of the facility. The Chozo had grown tired of maintaining the facility and felt called to move on to a different, more complete dwelling, which would become Talon 4. The Elysians left behind a number of logbook entries describing the history of the facility and the Chozo. The Slumber logbook entry in Prime 3 specifically states that not all of the Chozo perished on Talon 4 after all, part of which reads as following. A stellar object hit planet Talon 4, bringing with it a catastrophic corruption that sent the Chozo world into chaos. We watched helplessly as our creators perished, the few survivors fleeing to an unknown location. Powerless, we slept, and in our dreams, we lamented the deaths of our creators. This was our final vision, after which we were never able to see our creators again. So this entry clearly states that some Chozo did in fact flee from Talon 4 to an unknown location, not all of them perished. The Elysians essentially had the research station feed them data updates in their sleep, keeping them up to date on major events. The survival of the Chozo is also later confirmed in Metroid Dread, also known as Metroid 5, which features 2 living Chozo from conflicting tribes. Quiet Robe, a peaceful Chozo who works with Samus to stop Ravenbeak, a violent, power-hungry Chozo with dark ambitions. Let's look at this information from the perspective of that Metroid timeline. All three Metroid games take place between Metroid 1 and 2. So in the original Metroid Prime, the demise of the Chozo on Talon 4 is explored. Their survival on some level is confirmed via log entries in Prime 3, and then we see a couple of the surviving members essentially at war with one another in Metroid Dread, much further down the timeline. Now, assuming Metroid Prime 4 takes place on the same branch as the original trilogy, meaning between Metroid 1 and 2, or at least before Dread, that means the Chozo are definitely alive. The logbook entry also stated the Chozo fled to an unknown location. Will part of Prime 4 include Samus searching for surviving Chozo, or perhaps visiting another remnant of their civilization? Will the Chozo aid her in her quest? Will we finally see living Chozo in the Prime games after their continued importance? Personally, I hope the Chozo finally play some sort of direct role in the series, and that we learn more about what happened to them after the events detailed in the original Prime trilogy. We do have definite confirmation from two different Metroid games that the Chozo are alive in the assumed Prime 4 timeline, so it'll be interesting to see what role they play. As a side note, there's also a possibility Prime 4 will lean into the Chozo again due to their resurgence in Metroid Dread, the best-selling Metroid game of all time and the most recent. Many new players jumped into the franchise with Dread, so it would make sense to build off of that renewed relevance of the Chozo. So long story short, yes, the Chozo are alive during Prime 4, and it's a strong maybe that they'll play some sort of important story role based on the recurring presence of the Chozo throughout the Metroid series and these hints we've seen along the way. As a side note, if you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to support the channel. Now, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes mostly moves on from the Chozo and introduces an interesting new alien species called the Luminoth on the planet Ether. Echoes is unique in the sense that Samus is helping an alien race that's still alive on a planet battling for survival. Most of the planets Samus usually visits are already in ruins, and she's destroying a plague to make sure it doesn't spread or investigating what happened. Like the Chozo, the Luminoth settled on Ether and made it their homeworld after many hundreds of years exploring the galaxy. In fact, various logbook entries in the original trilogy confirm that the Luminoth and Chozo collaborated and shared technology and knowledge in an apparently peaceful relationship. However, the planet Ether was also unfortunately struck by a similar calamity to Talon 4. The planet was torn between light and dark dimensions, with a war ensuing between the Luminoth and the evil Ing to control the planetary energy. The lore scattered around the world details the conflict that pushed the Luminoth to the brink of extinction, forcing them to retreat into sealed pods in the Great Temple. At the end of Prime 2, Samus saves the Luminoth from destruction by destroying the Dark World and the Ing. The ending cutscene of the game shows a handful of Luminoth who have emerged from their stasis pods, apparently alive and well. The Luminoth clearly owe Samus a great debt. It'll be interesting to see if they return in some form in Prime 4 to aid Samus on her quest. Of the three major species and planets detailed in the Prime trilogy, only the Luminoth are alive and well on their original home planet. Personally, I think Echoes has perhaps the most underrated story in the entire Metroid series. The lore of Aether is rich and explains in interesting detail the final battle between the Ing and the Luminoth, and it's also one of the only games where you're directly working with the species you're trying to save. The Luminoth are led by U-Mos, an interesting figure who guides you on your quest, along with holograms of other fallen Luminoth. I'd love to see U-Mos or this species make a return in Prime 4, even if it's just a smaller part or cameo to help Samus on her journey. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption introduces yet another advanced alien species in the form of the Reptilicus tribes, who inhabit the planet Bryyo. Samus once again discovers their fate by scanning lore entries scattered around their homeworld. The Reptilicus civilization eventually collapsed due to an endless war between the Lords of Science, who embraced advancements through technology and science, and the Primals, who aligned themselves closer to some form of earthly magic or energy and older traditions. In fact, some of the enemies you fight in Prime 3 actually are fallen Primals who devolved to a beast-like state due to the consequences of the war. The lore entries you discover were written by the last Lord of Science, who details his final years hiding from the Primals and attempting to save Bryyo from environmental catastrophe. The Lord of Science also found a young Primal and adopted her as an apprentice of some sort. He called her the Prophetess due to her visions of the impending calamity that would strike Bryyo. The Lord of Science made a final stand against the primals to allow her to escape, and the prophetess etched his final messages across the ruins of the planet. Interestingly, Prime 3 never explains what happened to the prophetess. Did she eventually perish against the primals? Did she escape off-world? Is she still in hiding? We don't know for sure. However, it's interesting that she might be the only Reptilicus left with knowledge of both the ways of the primals and the Lords of Science, and who is still capable of intelligent communication. The log entries imply there are no longer any surviving members of the primals who are still intelligent, rational beings. Therefore, it's safe to say we can essentially call the Reptilicus tribes extinct unless the prophetess makes some sort of miraculous return. It's also therefore highly unlikely that we'll see the Reptilicus appear in Prime 4 due to their apparent demise. Anecdotally, the Reptilicus also don't seem to be as popular or notable in the Metroid community and timeline as the Chozo or Luminoth. Now, earlier I briefly discussed how Prime 3 also features the Elysians, the sentient machine caretakers of Skytown. In some ways, the Elysians are another notable civilization, or at least a community of some sort in the Prime trilogy, even if they are essentially just robots. However, the Elysians are also in a pretty rough and mostly destroyed state at the end of that game. There are also no official indications that the Elysians ever left Skytown or the planet Elysia. Therefore, I think it's highly unlikely we'll see them again in Prime 4, but I thought I'd mention them since they are technically another species of some sort. So what do you think? Will we see any of these civilizations reappear in Prime 4? Is this all just hopeless conjecture, and Prime 4 will probably just focus on new ideas rather than revisiting original trilogy elements? Leave a comment and let's discuss.